Finding a wife. That's the subject we're looking at today. It's in the series Israel, the Church, the Kingdom of God, the future or the history and future of God's people. The studies are in these books. There's 7 volumes. This is volume 1. Olive tree representing Israel on the front. They're available from the website Shopify, www.barrackministries.org.uk. We'll put it up on the end on the screen. Finding a wife, the history and future of God's people. So it's interesting because a lot of Christians don't know the history. They read Psalms or they read Isaiah or they read Jeremiah, and they don't realise it's a chronological dealing with God's people. The Bible's not written chronologically as it was written, but there's a chronology. It's the history of God's people, how he deals with it. It starts with creation and it ends with the end of creation. So it's a story. So many Christians have never read the Bible through. I say, have you read the Bible? And they say, yes. I said, where did you start? They said, I started at the New Testament. That's not the beginning of the book. And it's okay to read the New Testament. But I would suggest if you've never read the Bible through, it's a book. It's a history book of how God deals with his people. So start at Genesis and read through, and you'll get the whole plot, the whole picture. We talked last night about the beginning and the end. Then when you read the process, you understand because you know where it's leading. So let's start with Adam and Eve, and we'll go through to God finds a wife. Because I argued in the first study that God's plan is love, romance and family life, because we all end up living happily ever after on the new earth. God's got his wife restored, Israel, and Christ has got his bride, and we all live happily ever after. The first world order was God's. God had an order. The first world order was in creation. The cosmos, the world. The Greek word is cosmos. It means the order of things. So it's the fashion, the culture, the politics. That's the world, isn't it? Cosmos. It doesn't exist as anything physical. The earth is God's physical creation, but the world doesn't exist. We interchange the words, but in the Bible, the word for world is cosmos. So it's the order of things, the mindset. And the mindset was God's. Now the devil is the god of this world, and the thinking of this world is the devil because he's the god of this world. But the first world order wasn't the devil's, it was God's. Jeremiah 10:12. He hath made the earth by his power. There's 3 little statements that would make a good sermon. I've never preached it, but if you're out there and you're a preacher, here's a good title, verse to preach on. He's made the earth by his power. He hath established the world by his wisdom, and has stretched out the heavens by his discretion. So that's interesting. He created the world with his power, so it takes power to physically create. But the world order was his wisdom. The wisdom of this world is the devil's thinking. But the wisdom of the first world order was God's. By his wisdom, he's established the world. By his wisdom and stretched out the heavens by his discretion. I don't know what that discretion is. I've not looked at that to analyse it, but that would make a good study, wouldn't it? Made the earth by his power, established the world by wisdom, and stretched out the heavens by his discretion. Well, Adam was given an order. You can't have a one world order without order. There's got to be rules, hasn't there? And statements. So what was the first rule that God gave to man? Genesis 1:28. God had created man and woman, and God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply. That was the first commandment, be fruitful and multiply. The devil's done a good job, hasn't he, with birth control. stopping life, stopping family life. It's a crime if you have more than 2.4 children, isn't it? I don't know how you have the 0.4, but I know how to have 2. But it's a crime now. That's a devil's strategy to kill life. God said, be fruitful and multiply physically, spiritually, intellectually, be fruitful. That's God's a fruitful God. Everything that God created is fruitful. For one little pip of one apple, there's many pips in an apple, but just one pip, you get a tree that will produce 500 apples for 150 years from one little pip of an apple. That's the exponential curve of God's fruitfulness. You know, everything produces, trees produce. But man has decided to play God and said reproduction is bad. Cull the population. Georgia Guidestone said that the population of the world should be 500 million. So the plan for Bill Gates and eugenics, Winston Churchill was a eugenist. He believed it's evolution, the survival of the fittest. So if I kill 6.5 billion people and only live 500,000, that's a good thing. It's because we've survived. Survival of the fittest. You can kill people because the fittest survive. Can you see how evil evolution is? Psalm 47, verse 7 and 8. For God is the king of all the earth. Satan is the god of the system, the world, but God is the king of the earth, because Satan never took over creation. God is king of creation. Creation's God's. Anything physical, the devil can't take over. He's taken over the mindset, the attitude, the wisdom of this world. But anything physical is still God's. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. So anything created, so music, we don't have to redeem music. It was never the devil's. The devil can use anything that's God's. But music is maths and physics. It's vibrations, isn't it? I'm an audio engineer, so I know it's maths and physics. So it's physical. It affects our spirit. It's a way of communicating. It's a language, spirit to spirit. But that's a physical medium to transmit. Like CDs are a physical physical medium to spirit. We're impressed by music, aren't we? We're not impressed by the CD. It's the music that's on it. It's a medium. For God is the king of all the earth, sing ye praises with understanding. God reigneth over the heathen. God sitteth upon the throne of his holiness. God rules in the affairs of men. The mindset is Satan's, but God rules everything physical. He has the power of life and death, as the devil doesn't, does he? Anything physical is still God's, but he usurped the system, the world order. Well, Adam lost his relationship with God. He didn't have a religion, he had a relationship with God, and he lost it when he sinned. But he doesn't lose dominion, because God says, rule over the cattle, everything, have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and the animals. He didn't lose that when he sinned. We've still got dominion. We control all the animals. We can capture them. We can kill them if we want. We can put them in cages if they're dangerous. So that dominion over the creature is still applicable. He didn't lose that. But God never meant him to rule over men. Men shouldn't rule over men. Do you realise that? He said, have dominion over the cattle of the earth, the fish of the sea, the birds of the air. He never said over men. God wanted to be the king. He said, and God's rule through prophets. God will send prophets to tell you what I want. He never wanted man to rule over men, have dominion over men. God wanted to be the king of the earth, the king of all the earth. So if God's the king of all the earth, then no other men rules us except God. That's what God's perfect order. But men play God because they want to rule over us. Man was made to be free and rule over the animals, not rule over each other and subdue them and rape the countries for the minerals. That's man's doing, isn't it? The mindset of Satan. So Babylon, the counterfeit, because Adam and Eve worshipped themselves. That's the start of evolution, man becoming God. I don't know if you understand the evolution. It's not predominantly where we've come from, that we come from a one-cell amoeba or a big bang. That's the beginning. What's the end of evolution? It's where we're going to make men gods. That's what evolution's about, and that's what the science is all about, to make men gods. And Eve became a god. God says, obey me. She says, I'll do what I want. I'll eat the tree. I'll know good and evil. I'll be like God. So she became God, didn't she? She made her own morals. Men make their own morals that change from culture to culture, society to society. We make the morals. We're God. Can you see? And we want to live like God. We want to live forever. That's science, to find out how God made us so we can live forever. And we're getting pretty near it, aren't we? We've discovered the book of life, the DNA. That's the book of life, isn't it? It's a book with sentences and commas, and it's the whole book of life. And there's one bit of our DNA that goes brittle when we're about 30, and that's why we age. If they can stop that little bit of DNA getting brittle, we'll live forever. That's only why we age. That little bit of DNA becomes brittle and we start to age. That's what God changed Adam's DNA and said, you'll die. And he did. 2 Corinthians 4:4. I'm just backing up what I'm saying with, in whom the God of this world has blinded the minds of them which believe not. So clearly the scripture says Satan is the God of this world, the God of this age, all right. We'll see later studies, the kingdoms of this world become the kingdoms of Christ. Christ will have a new world order in the millennium, but up till then it's the Satan's world order, isn't it? They're working towards complete dominion, but it's always been Satan's. It's just not had control of people. The mindset is had, but it's never had people as slaves, the whole world. But we're slaves now and don't know it, aren't we? We can't say what we think. That's a slave. We've got to do what we want. When you have a birth certificate, you hand the legal right of your children to the government. Your children are not yours. They can come and take them if they think you're not bringing them up correctly. They're an asset. Children are an asset on the stock exchange. That's when a country borrows billions of dollars, it's how many people and how much they can earn. So you're an asset to the government. I won't go into it, but maybe I shouldn't say it because it's going off the subject. I don't want you to think about that. So Cain, the first son, the first one to be born of a woman. Adam wasn't born, he was created. So the first one to be born in the world was a murderer. Can you believe it? The first one to be born. Adam wasn't born, he was perfect. But the first sinner became a murderer. That's how it started. I'm preaching on Sunday night, and Churchill said, the history of the world is a history of war. There's been wars ever since Cain killed Abel. That's war, isn't it? Killing for justification. There's no just wars. You can't justify killing people, can you? Unless God tells you it. But you can't decide. We can never be just and decide for a war. So let's look at Cain. Cain progressed the growth of Babylon, the one world religion, when they left the presence of the Lord. You know, God put Adam out of the garden. He was in the presence of God, and God put him out in the world. He shut the garden off, so he didn't have access to the tree of life. And Cain left the presence of the Lord. It's interesting. Genesis 4. He'd murdered his brother, and God put a curse on him. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. When you leave the presence of the Lord, you create your own environment, because the presence of the Lord is an environment, isn't it? So when you leave the presence of the Lord, you create an alternative environment. So what did he do? We'll read on. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. This is not the Enoch that was translated. It's a different seed. It came from Seth, the one that was translated. So this is the same name. And he built a city. He built his own environment. God put him in a garden to tend the garden. He didn't want cities, but he left the presence of the Lord, so he had to create another environment. So he built a city. And his empire building it. And he called the name of the city after his son Enoch, and leave an inheritance. It's not this great Babylon that I have built. It's making a name for yourself. That's the ethos of all religion. Let's make a name for ourselves. Let's call ourselves Methodists, and let's grow and be the biggest denomination in the world. Let's be Pentecostal, and we'll plant churches and become the biggest denomination. Denominations are making a name for yourself. Why do you have to have a name for yourself? You have to have a name if you're meeting together. I'm called Barrett Ministries because my name's Barrett, but I'm not an organisation. That's the danger when you're making a name for yourself. You've got to get organised. Every denomination, we need a president. That's politics. You bring voting in. Let's vote for deacons. That's politics. That shouldn't come in the church. We're an organism, not an organiser. Well, we need a secretary, we need a treasurer, because we can't trust a pastor to handle the finances. Why do I have a treasurer? That's the world, because you can't trust people. We've got to keep books and keep an accounts. Why do you need to keep accounts? My wife doesn't keep my accounts and say, how much have you spent? I want to see what you've spent on this. My children don't ask me, Dad, I want to see the accounts of the family. They love me. They trust me. We should trust each other and find out who's the real Christian. And if somebody's fiddling the books, then they're not a Christian to me. If they don't repent, you know. So she conceived, and he called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. So he's empire building, isn't he? And unto Enoch was born Herod, and Herod begat Mehujael, and Mehujael begat Methuselah, and Methuselah begat Lamech. So 6 generations later, Lamech is the man I'm going to. We're looking at the history. What did Lamech do? He had 2 wives, and Lamech took unto him 2 wives. The name of one was Ada, the name of the other Zillah. Why am I telling you this? Because this is where culture came from. The seed of Cain. All culture came from the bad seed. We use it, but it came from the bad seed. Read on. And Ada bare Jabal. He was the father, the founder, the father of faith. Abraham, he was the example of faith. So he was the father. He instigated such as dwell in tents and such as have cattle. I would argue that's the beginning of commerce, because they were vegetarians till after the flood. After the flood, God said you could eat meat, but before they were vegetarian. So you don't have cattle to eat, do you? To trade with. I would argue that because of the 3 verses. That's the first one. The beginning of commerce, trading. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and the organ. That's where musical instruments came from, the bad seed. God can use it, but God gave us a voice to sing. We've got an instrument, we can sing. We've got a percussion, we can clap. We've got feet, we can dance. We've turned it into art forms. We analyse the music, and the devil uses music, and it's devil's music's come in the church now. And I'm a musician, so I can say that. Just a fact, if you don't know it, I'm an audio and engineer. Loud music, some churches have loud music. The old people have to have earplugs or leave the church. Loud music gives you the same adrenaline rush as amphetamine pills. Let me say that again. Loud music hits you. You go in a disco and you feel it hit you. Music goes through you, not round you. You hear a bass note on the side of a solid wall because the big sound waves have hit the wall, vibrated the wall, and the wall has vibrated the air on the other side. It's passed through the wall. Otherwise you wouldn't hear it. You don't hear the high notes because they're dissipated in the wall. But the loud notes, the big bass notes, they hit the wall and vibrate the wall. And the wall vibrates the air on the other side, and your eardrums pick up the vibrations. That's sound, isn't it? Vibrations. And your eardrums, million times sensitive, and it can pick up the vibrations to millions of degrees. It's amazing, your ears. So sound passes through you. So it gives you an adrenaline rush. Loud music. It's bombastic, it's oppressive. Loud music. Not constant loud music. Symphony orchestras have 120 decibels, but it's crescendo and then they come down again. That's all right. But when it's constant loud music, it's like being on amphetamines. So many young people go to church in these modern churches and they think it's God and they're shooting adrenaline. It's not the Holy Ghost, it's adrenaline they're shooting. They don't know the difference. I'm getting carried away. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the start of musical instruments. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. So that's the art sculptor, isn't it, and painting. An instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. God says, don't make any graven image. It came from Cain. Can you see how culture, the devil's used culture to damn us? There's nothing wrong with the harp. David played the harp. Johnny played the piano. Israel left the presence of God. They were up the mountain. God spoke. The mountain shook and they were in God's presence. They were frightened, weren't they? And what did they say? Don't let God ever speak to us again. It's too fearful. You speak to us. You go up the mountain. You know God. You go up the mountain and God will speak to you. And whatever God says, we will do and we will be obedient. But they didn't want the real God. They wanted Moses to have the real God. And what happened? So Moses went up the mount and they went down the mount. Moses went into the presence of God. They left the presence of God. What did they do? Dance round a golden calf. These are the gods. You see, when you don't want the real God who's scary and powerful and a vengeful God, vengeance is mine, said the Lord. If you don't want the real God, you make a God in your own image. So they said, these are gods that brought us out of Egypt. Not Jehovah. These gods are golden calf, and they worshipped him, and they were naked. So if you're naked, I would think that doing sexual practices, what were you naked for? That's what you do with devil worship. Witchcraft, they have the ceremony and then they have an orgy. I don't want to educate you to witchcraft, but that's what they do. They have the ceremony and they sacrifice whatever they're doing, and then they have an orgy and drugs. That's witchcraft. That's what Israel did. You see, when you leave the presence of the God, you create your own environment and your own God. And the church have wanted religion. That's religion, dancing around the golden calf. Music is very dangerous. It's very beautiful, but it's dangerous because you can worship music. I know Christians, they say, I love worship. That's a God. You should love God. You should worship God, but you don't love anything except God. I love preaching. No, I love God. That's what God told me to do. I love music. No, I don't love music. I use music, but I love God. Can you see how we can love the things instead of God himself? All the people saw the thunderings and lightnings and the noise of a trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. And they said to Moses, speak thou with us and we will hear, but don't let God speak to us lest we die. They were frightened of the real God. And Moses said unto the people, don't fear, for God is come to prove you, that his fear may be before your faces, that you sin not. It's good to fear God, not in the terrible way that he's going to beat me up and put me in the lake of fire. I hope my children fear me. Let's steal that. Two brothers talking. Let's steal that from your mum's purse. No, my dad wouldn't like it. They fear to upset me. I fear to upset God. I've got a fear of God. I don't want to displease him. And he said, that's good to have the fear of God, that you may fear him and not sin. But they didn't want to fear God. And the people stood afar off. And Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was. They didn't want God, so they left, and they ended up worshipping the golden calf, an alternative. And when the people saw that Moses had delayed to come down, this was after 40 days, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron. He was Moses' brother, and said unto him, make us gods, which shall go before us. For as this man Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we what not has become of him. We don't know what's become of Moses. Maybe he'll never come down. Aaron, you make us gods. Aaron was Moses' elder brother. He should have said, hey, if my brother says he's coming back, he's coming back. Trust him. Why didn't Aaron defend his brother? But Aaron made a great... And Aaron said unto them, so Aaron led the people to sin. He should have said, no way. But he said, break off the golden earrings. He was a secret usurper, Aaron. He tried to take over Moses, number 12. Aaron and Miriam chastised Moses and said, why should you have all the power? And God struck Miriam with leprosy. And God was going to kill Aaron. And Moses had to plead for him. It tells you in Deuteronomy. God picks men, not families. Break off the golden earrings which are in your ears of your wives, of your sons, of your daughters. Bring them to me. And all the people break off the golden earrings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received them in the hand and fashioned it with a graving tool. Aaron fashioned it with a graving tool. Aaron was Moses' brother. Aaron was the one who went to Moses with the rod. He was the spokesman for Moses who spoke to Pharaoh. He saw the miracles. The water turned to blood. He saw all the plagues of Egypt. And here he is making a golden calf. How easy is it for men of God to backslide? Don't criticise them, pray for them. Because they've got a massive job. The target for tonight, aren't they? If the devil can usurp Aaron, who's Moses' brother, who saw all the miracles, then it's easy to deceive the people because they respected Aaron. Aaron was the one who went to Pharaoh. So if Aaron says, break off your earrings and I'll make you a god, they believed him. A pastor who's renegade can lead a whole congregation astray because they look up to the pastor. And we should respect them, but we should, one speak, the other's judge. We should judge our pastor, shouldn't we? If he's not walking right. These are the gods that brought you out of Egypt. And when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it. And Aaron proclaimed and said, tomorrow is a feast to the Lord. That's capital letters. It's Jehovah, it's not Baal. He didn't say, let's have a feast to Baal. Let's have a feast to Ashtaroth. Let's have a feast to Molech. He says, let's have a feast to Jehovah, the Lord. They thought they were serving God. How blind can you be? To think you serve God and you're serving the devil. That's how subtle it is. And they rose up early in the morrow, offered burnt offerings, brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. In the Acts of the Apostles, it tells you they were naked. My wife said it doesn't say they were naked, it doesn't say naked, but in the New Testament it tells you they were, all right, in case you're challenging it. So, Satan always wants a mediator. Satan's the counterfeit of God. He wants to be like God. So Satan wants worship. But like God, God wants a mediator. God doesn't want direct worship. I would argue before creation, Melchizedek was the priest of the Most High God. He wasn't flesh and blood Melchizedek, was he? It said he had neither father nor mother, beginning of days nor end of life. He's not human, is he? You're human because you've got a mother and father. If you've got no mother and father, you're not human. And he was the priest of the Most High God. Some people think it's Jesus, but Jesus is the high priest. After the order of Melchizedek, Melchizedek was the priest of God. So he must have been priest in eternity. God always had a priesthood, a mediator. And God wanted Jesus. He's the mediator between God and man. God always speaks. The revelation, I'm quoting from Revelation 1, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to him, and he sent and signified it by his angel unto John. Jesus wasn't speaking to John, it was an angel. Jesus sent an angel to give the message to John. When you hear God, you're not hearing God personally. It's an angel who delivers the message. The angels are the postmen, the messengers, aren't they? That's what it means. So it's the same as if you say, the devil spoke to me. It's not Satan himself. He's got a billion demons. It's a demon that speaks to you. He's the general. The generals don't go into battle. They organise the battle, don't they? They sit in their armchair and they organise the troops, and some are cannon fodder and some are brave. But the general's at the back. He's not leading the army. He's organising the battle. That's Satan. That's God. God's got a billion angels. What for? To do his messages. So you're hearing God, but it's via an angel. If I'm an ambassador and I go to Portugal and I talk, it's the King of England who's speaking, not me. I'm only saying his words. Do you understand? It's not, I've got no opinion, I'm only speaking what I'm told. So the angels are ambassadors. So you're hearing God, but via an angel. So Satan wants an antichrist. He always wants somebody to worship a golden calf. Music can be a mediator to worship Satan or God. God destroyed the whole earth. So we start again, don't we, with Noah. Only 8 people were saved, so I reckon there could be a 6 billion on the planet. I reckon, and I've computed, there could be the same number as today, because you've got 1,600 years to the flood, haven't you? They live to be 900, so you can have a lot of children in 900 years, can't you? And so if you compute it, you know, you put 1 grain of sand on a chessboard, 2 grains of sand, 4 grains, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256. And by the end of you got to the end of the chessboard, you could feed the whole world if you put 1 grain of rice on the beginning. So it's exponential, the curve. So from Adam to the flood, I reckon there could have been 7 billion people. And God destroyed them all and saved the remnant. 8 people were saved. So we've got a new world order, haven't we? So God gives the same commandment. Let's read it. Genesis 9:1. It's interesting. He gave the same covenant to Noah exactly as he did to Adam, except he allowed us to eat meat. God didn't want us to eat meat because in the first creation he made us vegetarians. But all the way along, God has made concessions. He allowed us to divorce our wives because of the hardness of our hearts. He allowed us to eat meats after the flood. He lowered his standard because we couldn't keep it. If God should mark iniquity, who would stand? Nobody, would all be dead, wouldn't we? So God's lowered the standard. The standard is still perfection, but God He allowed divorce even though He hates it. Because God divorced Israel, we'll see in the next study. So He can't say, I've divorced Israel, but you can't divorce your wives. He divorced it for the right reason, the same reason we can divorce our wives. So He gave the same covenant. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, whoa, it's the same, be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth, rule over my creation, not over people. It's a family. You love each other. You don't rule over men. I'm the God. I'm the father of mankind. So rule over the animals. That was his. We're never meant to rule over people. Replenish the earth. It wasn't long. 3 or 4 generations later. So there were only a few. The Tower of Babel. Babylon emerges again. God's destroyed it all. Destroyed Babylon, didn't he? A few years later. 3 generations. So how long is that? 3 or 4 generations. It's hard to say. But say it's 4. How many people from 8 do you get in 4 generations? Not many. A village. The whole world met on the one plain of Shinar. People think there were millions of people all over the earth, but it's only 3 generations after the flood. You can check me out. So I reckon there's 30,000 people maybe from 3 couples, 4 couples, Noah and his wife, and the 3 sons and their wives. 8 people. So that you can't get many people in 3 generations, can you? However many kids they have. So it was a village, maybe 30,000, that's my estimate. I may be wrong, but it's that order. It's not millions, not tens of thousands. So God had to saw the way man was going, and he nipped it in the bud. When there was because he didn't want to destroy the earth again, so he nipped it in the bud. When there was only 3 generations, he started again. Satan tried to establish the one world order through Nimrod. He's the first Antichrist, one world dictator, isn't he, at Babel. And that's where the Trinity doctrines comes from. Nimrod, Semiramis, his wife, and Tammuz. Tammuz is in the Bible. That was the first Trinity. It's a pagan doctrine. The doctrine, the Catholics brought it in, paganised Christianity. I need you to know I believe in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. But the doctrine, the Catholic Church formulated it. Nicaea, 430 was it, the Council of Nicaea. Thomas Aquinas and the theologians said we need to decide what God is, because there was arguing. And it's a man-made doctrine. Traditions could be good or bad, but the problem with the Pharisees and the church today, Jesus says you don't know the difference between the commandments of God and the traditions of the elders. If you know it's a tradition, synagogues were traditions. God says don't make local places of worship. You worship in Jerusalem. The synagogues came from Babylon when Israel were exiled in Babylon, Judah. They built local places of worship. And when they came back with the Babylonian Talmud, it's a Babylonian Talmud that the Jews have, since they came back from Babylon, they built local places of worship. And Jesus preached in the synagogues, but he knew it was a tradition. But the Pharisees thought that was God's way, because the sages, that's the Talmud, the rabbis, man's idea of God, the writings of the scribes and the Pharisees. There were no Pharisees before Babylon. They were formulated in Babylon. Interesting. I mustn't get carried away. So, Nimrod, chapter 11, verse 1 to 9. And the whole earth was of one language and one speech. This is like, I estimate, 30,000 people. They were all in one plain. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain. So the whole world found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. So they dwelt on a plain. So there couldn't have been so many, could there? There couldn't have been millions on a plain. And they said one to another, go to, let us make bricks, burn them thoroughly, and for brick, and they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build a city. People think the Tower of Babel. The first thing, let's build a city. And the tower was in the city. It's Cain. He left the presence of the Lord and built a city. That's the beginning of the decline of God's one world order. So they built, let's build a city and a tower whose top may reach to heaven. I don't think for one moment they thought they could build it, 1,000,000 miles high to reach heaven. It was a worship place, a ziggurat, wasn't it? It was where they could have a portal to heaven. Let's build a tower so we can reach God. And let's make a name for ourselves. So the ethos of Babylon is let's make a name for ourselves. Let's build a city and a tower, and let's make a name for ourselves so we're not scattered. That's where the churches have denominations. Let's pool our resources. We're stronger together so we're not scattered. Nobody can divide us because we're too big. We can lobby the government. It's part of politics. Lest we be scattered upon the face of the whole earth. Well, we know what happened. God scattered them, didn't he? And all religions want to make a name for themselves. The Catholic Church want to take over the world. The Muslims want to take over the world. The evangelicals want to take over the world. Let's win the world for Jesus. Where do they get that in the Bible? We've turned the Great Commission, go and preach to every creature. Those that will believe will be saved, those that won't will be damned. We've turned the preach to every people to save the world. There's a million miles of difference. He says we must tell everyone on the planet, give them the opportunity to decide for Christ. But the decision's theirs. Shake the dust off your feet if they don't listen. Go to another city. But we want to take the world for Jesus. The world's Satan's. We're waiting for Jesus to come. He'll take over the world. It's not the church's job, I believe. So let's start about God finding a wife. That's a bit of history. God wanted a wife, so he called one man out of the system. There was only one religion. There's only ever been one religion. It's called Babylon. So God called one man out of Babylon, Abram. He was a moon worshipper, wasn't he? Worshipped other gods. For a relationship, not to start a religion, to start a family. Your family will cover the earth. It wasn't a religion. And he became the friend of God. So God called him for friendship, for relationship, because from his seed, God would choose Israel, his wife. And he started a dynasty. This is 2,000 years after Adam. So you can divide 6,000 years of history into three. Adam to Abram, approximately 2,000 years. Abram to David, Abram to Jesus, 2,000 years, and Jesus to his second coming to the millennium, 2,000 years. So you can divide it up. There's pivotal points. I call them dispensations. I'm not a dispensationalist as the doctrine, it's a theology. But there's certainly dispensations in the Bible. It talks about dispensations. Check it on Strong's. So God, the dispensation of grace, Paul says. So there's a dispensation. A dispensation is just a time period where God deals differently. He dealt differently with him in the Old Testament. We're in the days of the Gentiles. This is the dispensation, the time of the Gentiles. So it's scriptural. I'm not making a doctrine of it. People make doctrines of everything, don't they? It's not a doctrine. It's just how God explains things. So this was 300 years after the flood. God called Abram. So you've got the time scale, 1,600 years, the flood, 1,650 maybe. I think 1,665 years after the Adam, God flooded the earth. And then 300 years later, so it's nearly 2,000 years, God called Abram. Now Shem was still living, the son of Noah, when Abram was born. Christians don't know that, but if you work it out, it's obvious, because it gives you how old they lived. And Shem was still alive. He saw his great-great-great-grandchildren. Adam only died just before the flood. And Seth lived through the flood and through to Abram. Seth outlived Abram. He saw 8 generations, Seth. Amazing. Check it out. So, James 2:23, just to confirm that statement. And the scriptures was fulfilled, which said, Abram believed God, and it was imputed to him for righteousness, and he was called the friend of God. So Babylon is a counterfeit worship. Those of faith, we're saved by faith. So we're children of Abram, not children of Moses. Abram was before Moses. Abram was called when he was uncircumcised. Abram wasn't circumcised. He wasn't a Jew. He wasn't part of Israel. He was a pagan, and God called him out uncircumcised. He circumcised his firstborn son, Ishmael, when Ishmael was 13 years old. And Isaac was never on the cards till after he circumcised Ishmael. And the day after he circumcised Ishmael, God said, he's not the child of promise. Abram obviously thought he was, because he circumcised him. This is a covenant between me and you. So he circumcised Ishmael and himself and all his household. And only then did God tell him, when he obeyed God, it's going to come from Sarah. It's not Ishmael. He's the child of the flesh. So when Abram was circumcised, the next time he made love to Sarah, she conceived Isaac. So there's a principle there, there's a teaching, a whole hour's teaching. You can't produce the child of promise while you're uncircumcised. When he was uncircumcised, he produced Ishmael. When he was circumcised, then God said, next year, 9 months later, you'll have a child of promise. We've got to be circumcised in heart. People say, I don't want to produce Ishmaels, I want an Isaac. I've got news for you. You can't get Isaac without Ishmael. Abram's the father of faith, the beginning. If you can't produce something in the flesh of promise, you'll never produce something in the spirit. Ishmael first, Isaac, is necessary to persecute the child of promise. Galatians talks about it. So let me crash on. So Abram, his family, Abram, Isaac and Jacob. Jacob had his name changed to Israel. And because of a famine, Jacob went with 70 souls down to Egypt. 70 people, that's a significant number in the Bible. And out of 70 people, God made a nation. Not in Israel, in the world, Egypt. It's amazing. Why did God do that? Why didn't he make them a nation in Israel? Because he wants to call them out of the world. You can't be called out if you're not in. So it's setting a precedent. You've got to be called out of the world. We're all called out of the world. I was saved when I was 6. My father was a godly man, but I had to go in the world. I worked with gangsters 14 years. God had to put me in the world. We've all got to go to the world to be called out, and God called me out into ministry. Many people are born in unsaved families. They're in the world and they're called out. Even Jesus had to go down to Egypt. Think about this. When Herod was going to kill the babies, all the babies, God said to Joseph, flee to Egypt. Why not Syria? Why not Lebanon? Why Egypt? That's a type of the world. Why did Jesus have to go to the world? Because it was prophesied, out of Egypt have I called my son. Hosea prophesied that of Israel. They had to be called out of Egypt. But Matthew 2:15, it says, and Jesus went down to Egypt, and when Herod was dead, he was brought back to fulfill the prophecy of Hosea. Out of Egypt have I called my son. So even Jesus had to set the example and go in the world to be called out of it. And he had to be tempted of the devil because he was the second Adam, he was flesh and blood. He could have failed, so he had to be tested. If he was God, God can't be tested, can they? So he had to go through the process. Jesus is our example. He went to Egypt and was called out. Exodus 1:5, Jay, I forgot it. And all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls. So 70 people went down to Egypt. And then after 400 years, Genesis 15:13, they became a nation. And unto Abram, he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in the land that is not theirs. There'll be a stranger. God told Abram that his grandson would go down to Egypt and become a nation. There'll be strangers in the land that's not theirs, and serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. He actually told Abram how long they'd be in Egypt, and they were exactly 400 years in Egypt. And God called Israel out of Egypt, the slaves, to be a kingdom. And that's where God proposed to Israel to be his wife. Let's read it. Hosea 11:1 and Matthew 2:15. Do you want to put those up, Jay, for the people who are watching on YouTube? When Israel was a child, then I loved him and called my son out of Egypt. Hosea was talking about Israel, obviously, but prophetic things never end. His word never returns void. So prophecy's cyclic. Don't say, oh, that's fulfilled. It is then, but it's going to be fulfilled again. It's never finished because it's eternal. And this is Matthew. And there was death and was there Joseph and Mary and the babe, Jesus, until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which is spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, out of Egypt have I called my son. So Israel had to come out of Egypt, and Jesus had to go out of Egypt, and so we'll have to come out of Egypt. We're not of this world. Jesus says, if you love the world, it's spiritual adultery, James 4:4. You adulterers and adulteresses, don't you know the love of the world makes you the enemy of God? He calls it spiritual adultery, because you love God and you love the world. You've got another lover. The world is an idol, so it's spiritual adultery. Out of Egypt have I called my son. And verse 19:6, Exodus. And this is God proposing to Israel. Think of it as marriage talk, proposal. I'll be a God and you'll be my people, and you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you'll speak to Israel. These are the marriage ceremony. What's the marriage ceremony? You're both there. The registrar's in the office as a witness. Will you love, honour and obey, etc.? These are the conditions of a marriage till death do us part. You've got to say, I will. And then they turn to the other person, will you love, honour and obey till death do us part? I will. You've got to say, both parties have to say, I will. There's a proposal, and if you say, I won't, you can't pronounce your marriage. You've got to say, I will. So the 10 commandments are God's condition for Israel to be married. These are my commandments. If you want to be one with me, these are my rules. Don't commit adultery, and you'll be mine. You can read it all in Exodus. I've just got on verses. And God says, you'll be mine and I'll be yours. You'll be my people, I'll be your God. God says, he called Israel his peculiar treasure. I say that about my wife. She's my precious treasure. We say that, treasure, to our wives, because you're valuable. When you say it's a treasure, God says, you're valuable to me. I love you. I've loved you with an everlasting love. That's romance talk, isn't it? I've loved you with an everlasting. I'll love you till the stars fall out of the sky and the seas go dry, as the song says. I'll love you forever. So they all said, we will. And it's a blood covenant. The first blood covenant. There's lots of covenants where they kill an animal and it's a blood covenant. But there's only 2 places in the Bible where it says, this is the covenant in blood. Jesus made the second covenant when he proposed to Israel. This is the new covenant in my blood. So this was the first covenant. When Jesus said this is a new covenant, there must have been an old one, mustn't there? Because you can't have a new one. So this was the first one. God made a covenant of blood with Israel. Exodus 24:7. And he took the book of the covenant and read it in the audience of the people. And they said, I will. All that the Lord hath said, we will do and be obedient. We'll love God, we'll honour him. So God says, will you obey me? And they said, I will. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people. And he said, behold, the blood of the covenant, the marriage contract, which the Lord God hath made with you concerning all these words. You've heard the words, you've accepted it. It's a covenant. Marriage is a covenant, not an agreement. A covenant is binding. An agreement, you can break an agreement. You can't break a covenant. It's annulled. Marriage is a covenant. It's finished if you break it. 7 and 8. Leviticus 26. Well, let's read the one before, actually. Exodus 19, 4-8, Jay. The next scripture. Let's read that first. This is God pleading with Israel to be his wife. You've seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bare you an eagle's wing. I brought you and you've seen how I've looked after you. I brought you chocolates, I've married you, I've taken you on holiday, I've provided for you. I bare you an eagle's wing and brought you unto myself. Now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all the people of the earth. for the earth is mine. I can pick any nation I want, but if you enter a covenant with me, you'll be my people above all the people in the earth. God never wanted Israel to Judaize the world. He gave them a little plot of land the size of Wales, didn't he? He said, these are your borders. He didn't say, teach the heathen the commandments of God. They were to make Israel a peculiar people. They circumcised the children in the foreskin. They have dietary laws. They have leprosy laws. They sacrificed to their God, and He's made them peculiar. I think clean and unclean is to make them peculiar. Because he never said that to Adam, and he never said that to Noah. But he said it to make them different. Because all the heathens, they ate pig and they ate what they wanted. But he's making them peculiar so that every nation knows this little nation, they're God's. God delights in smallness, precious things. Diamonds are rare, coal's cheap. He wanted them to be a diamond nation, and all the world will know they serve Jehovah. They're different than every other nation. And that's the church. The bride of Christ is small. We're different. Is that the last verse? Now, and ye shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Holy means peculiar, separate, sanctified, separated. These are the words that thou shalt speak. And he gives the 10 Commandments. And the next verse, and Moses came and called for the elders of the people, and laid before their faces all the words which the Lord commanded them. And all the people had answered together. This is another scripture. All that the Lord hath spoken, we will do. I will. And Moses returned the words of the people to the Lord. He said, God, they've said I do. They've said they'll obey you implicitly. Leviticus 26, verse 11. And I will set my tabernacle, I will dwell with you. I'll set my home, my tabernacle among you, and my soul shall not abhor you. And I will walk among you, and will be your God, and you'll be my people. I'll be yours, and you'll be mine. That's marriage talk. I don't know if you know, but God's way of marriage, the legal contract is the engagement, not the marriage. The marriage is a feast. In the Bible, the contract is the engagement. I can prove it to you. When Mary was pregnant, and Joseph wasn't married to her, it said he was going to divorce her. He can't divorce her if they're not married. In God's eyes, the contract was sealed. And he was going to put her away, because the contract is the engagement. The marriage is the feast and the consummation. What happened is you agree to marry and you have a feast and you commit the blood covenant. You put a ring on a finger, an engagement ring. You're betrothed. But it's not been consummated. The husband goes away, builds a house, and he comes back, takes you to his village, his house, and you have a feast, the marriage feast. That's what we're going to have with God, the marriage feast of the Lamb. And then you go into your mother's tent and consummate the marriage. So it's not a marriage, it's got to be ratified with sex becoming one. So they ratify the marriage. That's the marriage feast. But the ceremony, we mix them up, we're engaged. But in this country, 50 years ago, I don't know whether it's true, if I was engaged to a woman, and I put the ring and we committed ourselves and the parents were happy, then it was a binding contract. If I jilted her and I said, I've changed my mind, I don't want to marry you, she could sue me for breach of promise. Do you know where breach of promise comes from? From the Bible. God swore that they'd go into the promised land. And when they sinned in the wilderness and round the golden calf and they wouldn't go, and God said, you're not going in now, and you'll all know my breach of promise. God broke his promise to Israel because of sin. People say God keeps his promises. Yeah, if you keep your side, it's a two-way thing. If you do this, I'll do this. If you obey me, I'll bless you. If you don't, I'll curse you. Deuteronomy 28. So God says, you'll all know my breach of promise. So you can sue your partner for breach of promise. So that's the contract. So Joseph was going to divorce his wife, but he hadn't consummated the marriage. It clearly says it before he knew her, she was pregnant. And he didn't know her till after the birth of Jesus. So he never made love to Mary till after the birth of Jesus. Because she had to be born of a virgin, didn't she? But she was already married in God's eyes. The contract was there. And he was going to divorce her, put her away. And God said, don't divorce her. It's the Holy Ghost. It's all right. What happens when you get engaged? You have a party, don't you? The engagement party. So what did God do? He had a feast. You always have a feast. That's why I know it all fits. He said the law. They said, I will obey the rules. And then they had a feast. Let's read about it. Then Moses went up, and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. Listen to this. And they saw the God of Israel. That's wrong translation, Maurice. You can't see God and live. Of course you can't. You'd die if you saw God. But God allowed it. God was so excited that he got his wife, that Israel had said, I do, that he allowed them to see him. I'll prove it. And they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet as a paved work of sapphire stone, and it was the body of heaven in his clearness. And upon the nobles and the children of Israel, God laid not his hand. They should have died. They saw God, and they should have died, but he laid not his hand. They said, I'm so excited. This is world history. I've got my wife. I've got a nation who said, I do. They'll serve me over above all the nations who serve demons. This nation's that I've chosen through Abram, they're going to be my wife. And after in the Bible, we'll see that Jeremiah says, I'm your husband. Speaking of God, I'm your husband, the creator of the universe. I'm your husband. And God divorced his wife. Who's give you the bill of your mother's divorcement? Because Israel committed spiritual adultery. God put them away. And when you put your wife away, you've got to send her out of the house. I don't know if you know the law of Moses, but if you divorce your wife, she can't live with you. You've got to put her out of the house and give her a bill of divorcement, a clean bill of health. So if somebody marries her, they're not committing adultery. That's the law of Moses. It doesn't say thou shalt not divorce. It says thou shalt give a bill of divorcement if you divorce her. And you've got to send her out of your house. So what did God do? He sent them out of his house. He says, you can't stay in Israel. I'm divorcing you. So he put them in Babylon to punish them. Can you see how it all fits? So that's it. So we've come from Adam. We've got the seed of Cain who's brought culture and all empire building and the devil's system. So there's a concurrent, there's Babylon running and Israel running, God's people. So I've written 7 books on the future and history of God's people. I've written 5 books on Babylon, the history of Babylon, and go into it in more detail. So we're up to God's engaged. So we need to see when the marriage was consummated, because if God had a son, the marriage just got to be consummated, hasn't it? And I think I can show you where it was consummated and then divorced. So this is a history of God's people. God's found a wife now. What happens? Tune in for the next study. So the next study is marriage and divorce. Tune into it. Have a wonderful week. God bless you.